Welcome to Passport to Terror. You are about to enter a world where the line between the living and the dead is blurred. A world where the past refuses to stay buried, and the spirits of the departed walk among us. These are not tales spun from imagination, but true accounts of encounters with the unknown. Stories whispered in the dark, passed down through generations, and etched into the very fabric of the places they haunt. Prepare yourself, for you are about to step into the shadows of Japan. The first real horror story in this four-part series is The First Ghost of the New Hospital.
Last month, I visited Japan again for the opening ceremony of a new hospital in Hokkaido. It was Chinese New Year and the streets were bustling with visitors. There's an old saying in Japan, the more visitors, the more accidents. Little did I know that saying would soon take on a chilling meaning. The ceremony went smoothly, and the hospital was officially declared open. But that night, right after the celebratory party, 2 patrons were rushed to our emergency room. A car accident. The roads were icy, and the driver of the car, an elderly man on his way to a wedding, had lost control. The car spun 40 meters across the bus lane and smashed into a parked tour bus. Miraculously, there were no tourists inside or around the bus at the time, but the bus driver wasn't so lucky. His lower body was crushed where the car had impacted. The elderly driver died instantly, his body mangled beyond recognition. When his family arrived, we had to deliver the tragic news. Their wails echoed through the sterile halls of the hospital, a haunting prelude to what was to come. The bus driver, however, was still alive. Barely. He was rushed into surgery, and the doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him. The operation was a temporary success, but his condition was critical. A week passed, and the bus driver remained unconscious. The doctors decided they couldn't wait any longer. They had to perform the second operation, even though his chances of survival were slim. The surgery was fraught with complications. The patient was bleeding profusely, and his vital signs were unstable. Despite their best efforts, the doctors couldn't save him. He died that evening, becoming the second death in our new hospital. That night, as I was tidying up the bus driver's room for the next patient, I felt an unnatural chill in the air. The room was dimly lit, and the silence was oppressive. As I was about to leave, I saw someone standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall. He was mumbling something under his breath, his voice low and guttural. Before I could react, a nurse who had worked at the old hospital for years grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Her grip was firm, almost painful. "Don't speak to them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Never speak to them." I turned to look at her, confused and terrified. When I glanced back at the corner, the figure was gone. The nurse quickly ushered me out of the room, her face pale and drawn. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The nurse refused to say anything more, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. I had just encountered the hospital's first ghost. Over the next few days, strange occurrences became more frequent. Patients reported hearing whispers in empty rooms, and some claimed to see shadowy figures lurking in the hallways. One night, a patient in the room where the bus driver had died woke up screaming, insisting that someone had been standing at the foot of their bed, staring at them. When the nurses checked the room, they found the window wide open, even though it had been locked earlier. The hospital staff began to whisper among themselves, sharing stories of the old hospital that had stood on the same site. It had been demolished to make way for the new building, but rumors persisted that the land was cursed. Some said that the old hospital had been built on an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the dead were angry at being disturbed. Others claimed that the hospital had been the site of numerous unexplained deaths, and the souls of the deceased had never moved on. I tried to dismiss these stories as mere superstition, but the evidence was hard to ignore. One night, as I was making my rounds, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, but no one was there. The footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent. I quickened my pace, but the sound followed me, echoing through the empty corridors. When I finally reached the nurse's station, I was drenched in sweat. The nurse on duty gave me a knowing look, but said nothing. The final straw came a week later. A new patient was admitted to the room where the bus driver had died. He was a middle-aged man with a broken leg, and he seemed in good spirits despite his injury. But the next morning he was found dead in his bed, his face frozen in a mask of terror. The doctors couldn't explain it. There was no apparent cause of death. That night, I saw the ghost again. This time, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was the elderly car driver who had died in the accident. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. They stared at me, their lips moving silently, as if trying to communicate something. I quit my job the next day. The hospital is still open, but I've heard rumors that the strange occurrences have only gotten worse. Some say the ghosts are angry, trapped between this world and the next. Others believe they're searching for something or someone. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. The new hospital is haunted, and the spirits of the dead are not at rest. The story of the hospital's first ghost has spread throughout Hokkaido, and visitors are warned to stay away after dark. But for those who work there, there's no escape. The ghosts are always watching, always waiting. And sometimes, in the dead of night, you can still hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls.
The second real horror story in this four-part series is the Kamikaze Ghost Plane Crash.
Last year, my brother and I decided to go fishing about 4 kilometers off the coast of Okinawa. It was the last day of my holiday in Japan, and I was determined to make it memorable. The weather was perfect. Calm waters, a gentle breeze, and the promise of a good catch. We had been out for about 3 hours and had already reeled in around 40 kilograms of fish. The sun was beginning to set, and we were preparing to head back to shore. That's when things took a turn for the eerie. My brother told me to pull the ripcord on the motor, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I tugged, the engine refused to start. We were stranded, the coastline barely visible in the distance. As we struggled with the motor, I heard a faint sound in the distance, a low droning hum that grew louder with each passing second. Then, out of nowhere, a plane appeared in the sky. It was unlike any aircraft I had ever seen. The plane was transparent, its dark green body shimmering like a mirage. Beneath its wings were crimson circles, the unmistakable markings of a Japanese kamikaze plane from World War II. My blood ran cold as the plane passed overhead, accompanied by a sudden icy wind that sent a chill through my entire body. My brother and I stared at each other, too stunned to speak. The motor, which had been dead just moments ago, suddenly roared to life. Without hesitation, my brother steered the boat toward the spot where the plane had crashed. But when we reached the area, there was nothing there. No debris, no oil slick, no sign of a crash. The only thing we saw was a large ray swimming near the surface, its shadowy form gliding silently through the water. That's when the whispering began. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, but as the seconds passed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They sounded like Japanese, though I couldn't be sure. The words were garbled, as if spoken by someone, or something, that no longer had a physical form. The whispers grew more hostile, their tones shifting from curious to menacing. It was as if the spirits, or whatever they were, didn't want us there. The air around us grew colder, and the boat's outboard motor sputtered and died once again. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, the motor roared back to life. My brother didn't hesitate. He gunned the engine and steered the boat back toward the shore as fast as it would go. The whispers faded as we put distance between ourselves and the crash site, but the sense of dread lingered. When we finally reached the shore, we were met with an eerie silence. The usually bustling docks were empty, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the pier. We quickly unloaded our catch and secured the boat, both of us eager to put the experience behind us. But as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a faint greenish glow on the horizon, just above the spot where the plane had disappeared. The next day, I flew back home, but the memory of that night stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about the ghostly plane and the hostile whispers. I decided to do some research and discovered that during the final days of World War II, a Japanese kamikaze pilot had been shot down near Okinawa. His plane had crashed into the ocean and his body was never recovered. I haven't been back to Okinawa since that day, and I have no plans to return. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint sound of a propeller engine in the distance, and I'm reminded of the ghostly kamikaze plane and the chilling whispers that followed. I can't help but wonder if the pilot's spirit is still out there, searching for something or someone to take with him into the depths. The story of the Ghost Kamikaze Plane has become a local legend in Okinawa, and fishermen are warned to avoid the area where the crash occurred. But for those who have encountered the ghostly plane, the warnings come too late. The spirits of the past are restless, and they don't take kindly to intruders. So if you ever find yourself fishing off the coast of Okinawa and hear the sound of a distant propeller, beware.
The third story in this four-part horror series is The Haunted Airport of Okinawa.
I was riding my sidecar motorbike, heading back home after a long journey far south. The road had been endless, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Twilight was creeping in, and exhaustion gnawed at my bones, forcing me to find a place to rest for the night. I stumbled upon a secluded camping field, a patch of land owned by a quiet, elderly man who offered me space to set up my tent. He even gave me some sweet corn, which I roasted over my small fire for dinner. The night was cool, the stars gleaming like fractured glass against the inky sky. As darkness swallowed the world, a strange unease settled over me. The wind picked up, rattling the flaps of my tent, whispering secrets through the towering trees. Then I heard them, footsteps. At first I dismissed it as the owner patrolling his land. But these were not the cautious steps of an old man. They were heavy, deliberate, and accompanied by an eerie clinking noise, metal against metal. The sound of armor shifting, swords brushing against their scabbards. My heart pounded as the noise grew closer, reverberating through the stillness. Gripping my flashlight, I unzipped the tent and shone the beam into the night. The wind howled, yet the field remained empty. No footprints disturbed the dirt, no figure lurked in the shadows. But as I turned to retreat, my light caught something. A silhouette in the distance. A man. His figure was rigid, unmoving, his head tilted slightly as if watching me. My breath hitched as I aimed the light at him, but before the beam could reach his face, he vanished. A chill crawled up my spine. I forced myself back into the tent, zipping it up tight, clutching my flashlight as if it were a talisman. Sleep was out of the question. All night, I lay there, heart hammering, ears straining for the sound of those footsteps returning. By dawn, exhaustion had dulled my fear. I packed up my belongings, eager to leave. The owner approached, his lined face curious. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight I couldn't quite place. I hesitated before recounting the footsteps, the metal clinking, the silent watcher in the night. As I spoke, the owner's expression darkened. Without a word, he motioned for me to follow. "This land," he began, "holds many secrets. You are not the first to hear them." He went on to tell me about the field's grim history. Historians believed it had been a battlefield during the bloody conflicts between the shogunate and imperial forces in the 19th century. Many young warriors had perished here, their loyalty to their lords carving their fates into the soil. The unmarked graves of those who never received a proper burial still lay beneath our feet. I stared at the ground, my stomach twisting. I had unknowingly camped among the restless dead. The owner's voice turned somber. "Some who come here hear them marching." I quickly finished packing, my nerves frayed. As I climbed onto my bike, the owner placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "If they watched you," he murmured, "it means they acknowledge you." I nodded, but deep down, I knew I would never return to that place. I was brought up to believe in the unseen, to respect the spirits that linger between our world and the next. My Native American heritage is rich with stories of such beings, of shadows that whisper and specters that roam the earth. My family has always referred to this as a gift, but more often than not, it feels like a curse. Living in Okinawa, Japan, since April 2010, I have been overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the paranormal energy here. The island is steeped in history, its soil soaked with the memories of war, its winds echoing with the cries of those long gone. The spirits here do not rest, and I have encountered them in ways I never imagined possible.
The fourth and last installment of this horror series is The Scary Apartment in Okinawa.
The first experience still haunts me. My husband and I were driving past a military zone one evening when I felt an overwhelming unease. The air grew thick, my stomach churned, and an invisible weight pressed against my chest. Then, out of the fading light, I saw him, a lone Japanese man walking along the road ahead. Something about him was unnatural. He moved, but his feet never seemed to touch the ground. At times he seemed to stretch, his form elongating and then shrinking back as though he were shifting between two realities. My breath hitched as we drew closer. I kept my eyes fixed on him, but just as we neared, he vanished into thin air. "Did you see that?" I asked my husband, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated before answering. "That area, it has history." Though he couldn't reveal much due to military restrictions, he told me about the munitions storage site and the tragedies that had occurred there. Stories of restless spirits, of phantom soldiers seen patrolling the grounds, of distant gunfire echoing through the night when no battle was being fought. Perhaps I had seen one of them, a lingering soul from 1945, still marching, still waiting for a war that had long since ended. My second encounter was much closer to home. In my apartment, my so-called mansion, there was one room I could never quite get comfortable in. The air inside always felt heavy, stagnant, as if something unseen was watching. For nights I awoke with an unshakable feeling of being observed. And then one night, I could take it no longer. I stepped into the room, determined to face whatever lurked there. The moment I crossed the threshold, a cold wave passed through me. My skin tingled, my breath caught, and an emptiness swallowed me whole. The third encounter was the worst. My husband was on a night shift, leaving me alone. Sometime in the dead of night, I awoke to a strange sound at the foot of my bed. The unmistakable crinkle of paper being crushed by unseen hands. I held my breath, listening as the sound moved, circling my bed, pausing at my side. I felt the presence before I saw it. A child's energy, restless, curious, unsettling. My body grew cold, my stomach twisted, the sensation eerily similar to a hangover. I shut my eyes, willing it away, but it lingered. Then I heard the footsteps. Heavy boots against the tile floor, moving from the door to the office. Relief flooded me. I thought my husband had returned. I called out his name. No answer. Moments later, I heard the floor creak at the bedroom door. I barely breathed, convinced my husband was finally coming to bed. But then the weight in the air changed. Something loomed over me. A presence, dark, watching, inches from my face. I could feel its breath, its energy pressing down on my chest, keeping me frozen in place. My mind screamed to move, but my body refused to obey. Dread crept into my bones. I turned on every light, refusing to let the darkness reclaim me. When he finally arrived at dawn, I ran to him, desperate to tell him everything. "We're getting a cat," I said, "and I'm smudging the house." The next morning, anger replaced my fear. I smudged every corner, demanding the spirits leave. We got 2 cats, and since then, the encounters inside my home have stopped. Outside, however, is another story. In Okinawa, the past does not rest. The spirits here are not whispers or fleeting shadows. They are felt, seen, known. And no matter how much I try to ignore them, they are always watching, always waiting. For what? I do not know, but I fear the day I find out.
And so we leave you with these tales from the other side. Stories of restless spirits, haunted places, and the thin veil that separates our world from theirs. But remember, these are not just stories. They are reminders that the past is never truly gone, and the dead may not be as far away as we'd like to believe. So the next time you hear a whisper in the dark, or feel a chill where there is no breeze, ask yourself, are you truly alone? Or have you too stepped into the shadows? This is Passport to Terror in Japan, flying on a broomstick to another